Good morning. A warm welcome to all of us. Our organizing team, which I'm representing here today, is delighted to see that so many of you followed our invitation for the Symposium on Gender Bias, Sciences and Practices. With this event today, we as a neuroscientific community are taking our responsibility. We are taking our responsibility to raise awareness and provide actual scientific evidence for the existence of this problem in its many facets. But today, we even want to go a step further. Together with our invited experts and participants, we will learn about strategies which can be applied in order to address this issue practically, in academia, the private sector, and in society. This event forms part of our action plan of the Institute's gender equity movement, which we have published a couple of years ago. I must say a bit naively, but certainly determined, and with the support by the editor we had approached for this manuscript, we set out to develop and test a scientifically based strategy to combat gender bias. Our practical roadmap, which is shown here, shows that this event integrates into the step mostly of raising awareness. It is furthermore intended to foster the network, create educational media, and exchange here about practical tools. But let's leave the theory and become concrete. Why are we all here today? Let me try to set the stage for our speakers by giving just a couple of basic definitions and images. When turning to the official UNESCO definitions, sex is defined as the biological differences which are universal and determined at birth. Gender, however, refers to the roles and responsibilities of men and women that are created in our families, our societies and cultures. The concept of gender includes expectations about characteristics and behaviors. Gender roles and expectations are learned. They can change over time and vary. Simply put, gender is a kind of label that we add to individuals. We copy this label from our environment, thus perpetuating observed biases. Good news about this is we can actually change socially constructed roles, because they are not biologically determined. But bad news is that it seems kind of hard to change. I forgot to mention actually the definition of bias, which is very important, and it shows an image that I think illustrates what we are facing very well. So bias is defined as the disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea, individual or group. It is, simply put, a systematic error. And so this systematic error, when talking about the gender topic, is the error of defining a person by offsetting our judgments towards only one subgroup, the default male. This was recognized early on by the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, who I would like to cite from her famous book, The Second Sex, where she writes, "Humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself, but as relative to him. He is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other." And a lot of examples on the default male are actually nicely written down in this book that I would really recommend you for easy reading on the topic by Caroline Criado Perez, which is called Invisible Woman. It's a very well-referenced book, so you will find a lot of sources and information in there. But this is not just about philosophy or activism or an opinion. This is actually a scientific fact. So I put in a very recent paper that just came out on Science Advances just last week ago by the Sympion Lab. Here, these authors used sophisticated computational tools to screen for the similarity of meaning of words. And they actually figured out that the actual concept we have of a person is much closer to a man than to a woman. Likely the greatest challenge of all this is that what we are fighting against is something we're not aware of. This happens unconsciously or implicitly, as we say. In other words, implicit gender bias is discrimination that has gone underground. It is the unconscious process of pre-selecting possible judgments based on gender stereotypes. It is very fast and efficient and suits us perfectly, especially in a rushed and complex context where we heavily depend on automatisms. But these automatisms actually create injustice. Another problem is also the early onset of this issue. A study by Bayan et al. From a couple of years ago demonstrated that already at the age of 6, girls judge the same gender as actually being less intelligent, less brilliant. And what I think is a very heavy message to take is also the message of the stereotype threat. That means that these stereotypes we're carrying with us are actually affecting our performance. And so this study by Pascal Huguet, which has been replicated several times, shows that actually if girls are instructed, when asked to replicate this geometrical figure, when they're instructed to do this geometrical task, they perform below the performance of boys. While just changing the instruction of the task, which remains the very same, saying this is a drawing exercise, actually girls outperform the boys. These definitions and concepts are mirrored in the many questions we have received from you during your registrations. These questions reflect our worries of how we can translate these scientific insights into working policies. We wonder how to educate our children, how to guide our students, how to hire our staff in a non-biased way. We wonder how we can recognize what happens implicitly and how we can measure a behavioral change. We wonder whether these changes should happen inside each of us, so bottom up, and we wonder how this should go along with regulations coming from top down. And lastly, we wonder whether this gender question is just the start of a movement to a generally more inclusive society. I don't want to keep you much longer, but before we dive into real content, let me just say thank you. We are grateful for the reviewers who years ago had our grant proposal for this symposium in their hands and judged it actually worth funding. Without these people, we wouldn't be here today. We are honored to welcome our scientific experts who are going to share their data and insights with us today. And lastly, and also very importantly, we are really thankful to all the people that signed up for this event. So I just put a couple of numbers here without going in detail, but actually the last counts this morning have crossed the 600 line of registered participants. So, what's happening today? Today we'll focus on 4 different topics. In the first session, we'll learn about implicit and cognitive biases. This will be followed by a small coffee break, which just takes place outside of the auditorium. Then we'll tackle the question of the origin of gender differences. We'll have a light lunch also provided in the same area for the in-person attendees before going on with our session on gender bias in our daily lives. After a last coffee break, we'll close our day with a session dedicated to the practical tools how to fight gender bias. Each session is actually accompanied by a roundtable discussion at the end of our talks. No questions can be taken directly after each individual talks, so please keep all the questions for the roundtables. I encourage all the people on the Zoom webinar to already put down your questions during the talks so that we can sort them out and actually address them here on stage. And also during the roundtable discussions, you will see some artwork that has been contributed to the workshop by the artist Fiamma Luzzati, just as a food of thoughts. Well, and now I wish us all a great event with inspiring talks and constructive discussions. And I'll give the stage to the first chair of the first session, Emmanuel Woll.